Here we go again. I'm Defender Emerald, and I recently found out that pizza may technically be a vegetable. Let me whip you back in time a bit further than usual. If I were to ask you, what's the oldest video game character you can name off the top of your head? I'm sure most of you would say Mario, some would say Donkey Kong, and then there are those of you who would say Cranky Kong, and technically you would be correct. But we can take a step back even further. Who remembers the tragic fall of the legendary hero Pac-Man? Released by Namco in 1980, Pac-Man is a concept as ubiquitous as the first Star Wars. By no means perfect, but a pretty solid entry point to the whole new world of imagination and potential that was video games back in the day. And you know, there's a reason it's still an institution all these years later. So many of the most iconic and understandable video game mechanics, programming quirks, everything, are so easily displayed and demonstrated in this game. You've got the obvious stuff, 3 lives, how long you have to survive, a point system, how close you are to leveling up, and how high up you're getting on that godforsaken high scoreboard, because that's always important. But that's just the stuff on the surface. You dig a little bit deeper, you come across things like the simplistic enemy AI, displaying how each of the ghosts are going to chase Pac-Man in their own various and rather strange ways, and the most interesting bit, at least to me, a little-known mechanic known as input buffering. For example, you know those moments when Pac gets into a wonderful love affair with a wall and it takes a moment or two to turn in any way? That's input buffering. Hope you learned something today, kids. That being said, Pac-Man hasn't always been locked to that eternal damnation of maze hell for his entire life. As a matter of fact, this round yellow lad took a step into the third dimension way back in the pre-GameCube era of 1999, with Pac-Man World on the original PlayStation. To put the story in the simplest of terms, it's a PS1 era 3D platformer, nothing special, the boss fights were a slug, there was a remake 22 years later, moving on. Now let's cut to the story that you all came here to see. We begin in 2002, with an idea for a sequel. Pac-Man World 2 was released for all 3 consoles of the 6th generation. It is also, notably, the second game a young Mr. MJ played. Now, I got Cars as a kid because I grew up watching Thomas the Tank Engine, and the 2 franchises had distinct similarities. I got Pac-Man because it was an actual video game. And as a video game? Well, I never got particularly far in it, but I do remember what I played of it fondly. As did a lot of people, it seems. Talk to anybody born in the early 2000s about Pac-Man, and if the 21.642% chance that they know what you're talking about wins out, they'll probably give you a solid, emphatic, Pac-Man World 2 in response. Bearing that in mind, let's get into this thing, because the plot is weirdly top-heavy. So the iconic ghosts from the game, Inky, Blinky, Pinky, and Clyde, sneak into Pac Village and pick some golden fruit from the tree in the center of town. But uh-oh, their shenanigans accidentally unleashed a mysterious demon called Spooky, who was locked away by an ancient wizard's potion. The next morning, the venerable Professor Pac informs our spherical hero of the stakes and we are off to the races. Yeah, the plot isn't exactly Shakespeare, but nobody was really expecting it to be. It's Pac-Man. The original idea is nothing beyond unparalleled gluttony. Perhaps more poignant a message now than it was half a century ago, but I digress. We start out in this pseudo-tutorial area created within Pac Village. Here you can acquaint yourself with all the ins and outs of our adventure. And what we have in front of us is a 3D collectathon platformer. Along the way, you'll grab up the usual Pac staples, the dots of course, featuring the iconic chomping noises we've all come to expect from them, as well as all of the fruit Mr. Thaddeus J. Puckman collected in his maze excursions. Sadly, my favorite fruit didn't make the cut. Rest in peace, keys. I'll remember you when I have to explain your shards to my dentist. Other than that, things are fairly typical when it comes to the mechanics. You get a dash move called the Rev Roll, a ground pound called the Butt Bounce, and a 3-hit live system. Collect 50 Pac Dots or a health wedge and get some more health back. And honestly, being a cartoony 3D platformer, the simplicity does work in the game's favor. But now we reach the all-important question. How does that platforming feel? Alright, so the problems with Pac-Man come down to one key issue. This boy is round. And for the sake of the Rev Roll, that's completely fine. Hell, it's even helpful when you need to bounce around on certain surfaces, especially because of how serendipitously this is weaved into a lot of the earlier parts of the game. The Butt Bounce is also fairly versatile and deals with enemies pretty easily, which is highlighted when it comes to the game's bounce pad mechanics, known as the B-doings, or as I used to call them as a kid, B-doingings. I was 6 years old, give me a break. All of those positives to say, there are bigger issues with the platforming. You see, the Pac rolls back. A lot. I make it sound a lot worse than it is, but this in conjunction with a ledge grab system that saying it barely works at all would be putting generously, it all leads to this surprisingly slick platformer, and not in the cool way. Pac Village itself is actually a really good intro level because it shows off all of the good and all of the bad of the mechanics wonderfully. The collectibles are there, with a few harder to get than others, the physics issues right there on full display, as all of the roofs in the buildings are completely rounded off, so you can't really ledge grab to give yourself a reasonable vantage point. That being said, it isn't all bad. It gives you a solid demo of how to control the pack, the music is really good, and you get a bit of ghost chomping action right there towards the end. All in all, a solid tutorial level and a really nice entry point to the world at large, even if all of the problems are on full display. After this point, the world is broken up into 6 different themed areas with 3 levels and a boss in each. A fairly simplistic setup. It also applies that mythical Mario setup. You know, Grassland Forest, Ice World, Fire World, Ocean, Spooky World, boss. No desert in this Pac-Man World, it would seem, but you know, I'm fine with that, considering the last time a Pac Pharaoh was involved, it didn't go over too well. Regardless, World 1, Paradise Meadows, is as simple can be. But this allows me to introduce 2 critiques about this game. First up, we've got the time trials, which are okay, but kinda strict. The much bigger issue here is the collection elements. Your progress isn't saved when you leave a level. So say if you collect everything in a level but forgot a small group of 6 Pac dots decorating the rim of a platform that you couldn't see because the camera was locked where you couldn't see them. Tough talk, mans. Go collect everything all over again. While it is pretty easy to complete the first real level, the bare basics, every level beyond this is essentially a lost cause. This is really unfortunate because with wide open spaces everywhere with points of no return around every bend, exploration is functionally pointless. I say all of this to justify the fact that I couldn't get past the 3rd level in the game, Canyon Chaos, for weeks at a time. I was 6 years old, give me a break. World 2 takes place in the treetops, which is when the platforming challenges reach its peak, if you ask me. There's a solid amount of difficulty to be found here, but nothing overtly unfair. I admittedly thought I would have had more complaints about the camera, which is limiting, don't get me wrong, but not as impossible to work with as I remembered it as a kid. And for what it's worth, on a casual run, there aren't really any issues. Unfortunately, perfection rears its ugly head here, and this is where I just point blank gave up on going for 100%. Good thing it doesn't give you anything if you persevere. One great bit here is the metal ball power-up. This little nugget made its debut back in the bare basics, but it's actually useful for more than being underwater. This bad boy makes you invulnerable against most environmental hazards, be it lava, buzzsaws, or butane and butane accessories. All 3 of these factors combine to result in this little gadget being incredibly helpful to you to getting through all 3 of these levels. The first of which, Bedoing Woods, will always have a special place in my heart because of a moment I shared with another kid in kindergarten. It took me forever to get through this level. So much so that the music was stuck in my head, but because I was 6 years old and barely paying attention to anything at that point, it was corrupted in my brain to have a weird banjo twang associated with it. And as a result, this kid and I used to do some air banjoing to it. Steve Martin, eat your heart out. After that bizarre ordeal, we turn a corner to see a snowy mountain on the world map. And just like that, everything changes. I don't know if they ran out of time or money or what, but from this moment forward, it seems like the quality assurance testing just ceased. The ice levels in particular seem to have different problems depending on which area you're in. The first level, Ice River Run, is surprisingly strict in its platforming and the ice patches are insanely difficult to deal with. Level 2, Avalanche Alley, is a bizarrely long level with multiple different issues within. First and foremost, it's mostly a chase level with an avalanche following you. The problem therein is that the camera is way too close to the pack, and when you're running away from the screen that you can't see obstacles and bottomless pits coming up in front of you, you end up resulting in a lot of deaths that you couldn't be prepared for on your first time through. What makes this even more egregious is that the level terrain doesn't telegraph the pits well enough to prepare you for what's coming. The other issue comes from the platforming bits. Tall, icy mountains that you have to jump between, and in the interim you've got peaks with rev-roll rams on them that just come out of nowhere and throw Pac-Man into the snowy ravine. All in all, this level in particular is a bit of a patience tester. Not impossible by any means, but you're going to be burning through quite a few lives here, so just be prepared for that. Level 3, Blade Mountain, sadly suffers from a lack of Wesley Snipes, but gives Pac-Man some ice skates to fly around in and crack open crates with his jumping kickflip attack. This is one of the best levels in the game. Surprisingly, the few auto-runner levels in this are thoroughly enjoyable, with controls that are really fluid and layouts that are easy to learn. Definitely give these a shot if you haven't before. They are a blast. Unfortunately, after this, we've got the worst area of the entire game. The volcano. These levels are long, sprawling, go back in on themselves constantly, and death is ridiculously easy. One level in particular, Volcanic Panic, saw me burning through over 20 lives trying to do a rev roll jump, which requires a specific input to stop your momentum, but not the same input it usually does, so you end up rebounding into a fiery death where biblically accurate Volcarona comes to harbinge your soul. But if all of that nonsense weren't bad enough, well, have I got a treat for you. Let's talk about the boss battles in this game. The first one, with Blinky's Killer Frog, is actually really cool. It has this unique setup where the tongue and the uvula of the frog are the weak points, and you need to butt bounce or rev roll in order to take it out. Sadly, this is also the most unique fight in the game.
In the Pac-Man universe, frogs are an apex predator.
The next two bosses, Inky's Blade-O-Matic and Pinky's Revenge, aren't particularly challenging, and I honestly don't remember the difference between the two of them besides the setting. One takes place in the forest, the other one takes place in the snowy mountaintops. And then there's Clyde in the Caldera.
This boss fight can lick my taint.
I have no idea what happened here, but it doesn't work. Now, I'd like to think that I'm the type of guy who can accept responsibility for screwing up at video games. I know I'm not good at Dark Souls, I accept that. Moving on. But listen to what I am dealing with here. The rev roll ramps, the key method to avoid the boss's attacks, are finicky as all hell. Sometimes they work with no issue, but other times, I charge the ramp for the same windup, same angle, same everything. I faceplant against the damn column and turn into a pack-s'more. And if it were just that alone, it would just be a kind of unfair fight and nothing else. But no. Clyde's robot is different from the other two. It resists the rev roll, so if he floats into your path, up yours, jackass, hope you like your pizza extra crispy. He also shoots out fireballs, and they leave these little fiery wisps on the ground around you, which would be decently challenging to avoid if they weren't barely visible smoke made even less visible because of all the lava everywhere. And if that weren't enough, for some ungodly reason, Clyde's hitbox is broken. Watch as I bounce on his head over and over again, and it does absolutely nothing. Everything about this battle is awful. Now, for most of the previous world, a lot of the problems could be boiled down to Pac-Man's spherical nature. Things like the rev rolling problems in Volcanic Panic, or things such as the ramp at the end of Magma Opus. They all have to do with the fact that Pac-Man's a round boy and the game didn't exactly program that correctly. But not this. This one is not Pac-Man's fault in any way. I had other frustrating moments during this game, but this fight took at least 50 lives out of me and made me rage quit for about 3 hours. I never want to think about this ever again. But believe it or not, there is still one more problem that the game doesn't directly address. This is not Clyde. For reasons I don't really know, Blinky and Clyde had their names swapped. The funniest part about this is that there's a whole wiki page about this mythical Clyde and Blinky Error, which is a solid read if you could do it with a chuckle like I was. For sake of reference, this is also how I found out that Blinky isn't the blue one. Congratulations, this is excruciating. Can we move on to another bad set of levels? Speak of the devil, water levels, right? I'm a firm believer that they're never done well. Sorry, Rayman, not even you. Considering Pac hasn't exactly been a stellar exemplar of the platformer genre up to this point, you wouldn't be blamed for expecting the trend to continue underwater. And for the most part, you're right, but not really. The physics aren't really a problem as the levels are all auto-runners, but that brings up a whole new slew of issues. To put this as simply as I can, there were a number of situations where Pac-Man is swimming way too slow to avoid enemies that come up behind him. And on the other hand, there's a number of situations where he just point-blank cannot avoid damage because Pac-Man doesn't stop moving. A real catch-22 situation if I've ever seen one. But all of that pales in comparison to the yellow Pac-Marine. The sub, believe it or not, is actually not all that terrible to navigate with. It's responsive, if a little bit slow, and can dodge obstacles a lot easier than it would seem like. Also, surprisingly, the draw distance isn't as bad as it looks. Sure, it's pretty miserable, but at the same time, there's nothing in front of you that you don't have ample time to get away from. It's when the enemies enter the picture when things start to take a turn for the worse. And no, the irony isn't lost on me that Clyde is the one piloting all these submarines. Once again, he makes me want to tear my hair out. Good work, Scuzzbucket. These enemy fighter subs are absolutely brutal. They prey on the one weakness of the submarine: its defense mechanism. Pac-Man's sub comes equipped with 6, count 'em, 6 missiles that take forever to regenerate. The issue with it is the targeting system, or rather, the lack thereof. There's a reticle that pops up on screen when you're trying to target something, but that alone is not a guarantor of success. Let's move on to the boss of the area real quick, because it just might as well be the ending portion of the Yellow Pac-Marine level. The whole crux of this fight is trying to knock off propellers from the Ghost's battleship. The problem with that is that these damn propellers swivel around the screen like Lightning McQueen on a dirt road. And just for reference, these missiles always swivel off to the left, so when you fire, it's just perpetually leading to an impasse. Christ, this game pissed me off. Onto the final area, Ghost Island, which is unequivocally pretty decent, which is better than the last 3 worlds can say. Starting out with the Haunted Boardwalk, we've got another auto runner, but on roller skates this time. All in all, it's a natural progression from the previous iteration. The atmosphere here is at its peak and stays that way for a while. The dark, spooky bog is foreboding and prepares you for the final showdown. The next level, Night Crawling, gets us away from the bog for a bit, going into a sort of trapeze of platforms in the darkness, with a maze of bedoings and one last massive chasm that you have to jump across with the rev roll. It's intense, it's heart-pounding, it's just good, man. And if this were the final level, it would be a solid send-off to the game. Decently challenging, very atmospheric, and the music is great. Sadly, we live in the worst possible timeline, so there's one last level we have to discuss. Ghost Bayou should have been great. You're confronted by an evil tree known as the Wormwood at the start, daring you to defeat waves of enemies and solve his riddles 3.
Or should I say, his riddles tree?
This area sucks. Why, you ask? It's a maze. Thematically appropriate? Yes, but at the same time, this is a ridiculously convoluted maze, which hits a point where a cutscene makes you think you have to do the entire maze all over again, and checkpoints are very few and far between. Along the way, you have to do some rev-rolling shenanigans with very little margin of error, so hope you got that A button ready, and continual backtracking with few visual indicators on where things are beyond the button activation cutscenes, so hope you were paying attention, bub. After getting through the 9th circle of Pac Hell, we arrive at the Wormwood, who dies as soon as we walk up to him.
Good.
At that point, the big bad himself, Spooky, arrives and swears revenge on Pac-Man for the absolutely nothing he's done to stop him throughout the game. With that, we swim across the map one last time to return to Pac Village to stop Spooky and put him back in that tree stump from whence he came. With the golden fruit in hand, Pac-Man transforms into a golden Pac-Man. This is purely aesthetic, you don't really get any help from it at all. And the final battle begins.
Full disclosure, I've never beaten this boss in my life. The last time I tried, I was like 12, kept dying over and over again, and gave up in a fit of rage.
Now, all these years later, how was it? Honestly, a reasonably challenging fight. Spooky is a bit ineffectual when you know what he's capable of, though. The first half of the fight, all you really have to do is avoid his fireball attacks, which it isn't the easiest thing in the world, but you can learn and adapt. It's in the back 9 where this battle gets tough. At about the halfway mark, Spooky starts spawning enemies to distract you, which is a solid tactic, because this is where the fireballs start homing in on you, becoming significantly harder to dodge. After throwing out more enemies than you know what to do with, Spooky has one more trick up his vaguely ectoneurite-looking sleeves. The final obstacle to face in the game are fireballs that explode when they hit the ground, creating a flame trail that follows Pac-Man wherever he goes. You're on a timer, you chompy git. Better channel your inner Egon Spengler and get Ghost Bustin'. The way to get spooky is easy. Just run up and kickflip him when he lowers himself. Kick him in the ghoulies enough times and bada bing, bada boom, Pac-Man World 2 is over. Watch the final cutscene, please exit stage right. Or it would be if it weren't for one very fun detail. In Pac Village, there's a building you can walk into labeled only by a very obvious arrow pointing towards itself. Take a stroll inside and you're introduced to the original Pac-Man Museum, attended by Sue. No, not that one. Now here's where the fun begins. Throughout the game, aside from the Pac Dots and fruit, you can also pick up a bunch of Namco tokens. These unlock various games inside of the Pac Village arcade, and we've got some interesting picks here. Of course, you've got the original Pac-Man, unlocked when you get 10 tokens. This is about as boilerplate as Pac-Man gets. It's fun, no doubt, but there are more interesting things to discuss the further down we go. 30 tokens will net you the puzzle game Pac-Attack, a Tetris-style game where you have to line up ghosts for Pac-Man to devour like the gluttonous shrew that he is. It's by no means a bad game, but something about it just doesn't seem to click in the right way. It might have something to do with the idea. Something about Tetris, but with Dr. Mario pills getting crammed in, preventing the lines from getting cleared properly. Or maybe it's just the shape of the pieces that drop down and their limited rotation capacity that they have. While this game was originally released as a completely separate game known as Cosmo Gang the Puzzle, I do have to give credit that the Pac-Man in space aesthetic is a really fun idea. Check out some of this art. Hell, Pac-Man looks like he's wearing a pool floaty, I love it. When you wrangle up 60 of these bad boys, I gotta admit you get kinda stiffed. All you unlock is the jukebox of the game's music, but the one interesting thing to note here is that the worlds all have names of the jukebox that aren't seen anywhere else, most notably being different from the instruction booklet. This is where the name Paradise Meadows for World 1 comes from. A bizarre thing to be sure, but at least it's kind of interesting. Next up, hitting that magical number of 100 tokens unlocks Pac-Mania. Now this is something special. Pac-Mania is an isometric version of the original Pac-Man with two key differences. First and foremost, the camera is zoomed in significantly closer to the old lemon head than it is in the original. Now this would seemingly create a problem because you don't have as much time to prepare for the ghosts when they're making their way towards you, but never fear because they gave Pac-Man a solution. He can jump now. So much so that it even lets you jump and turn at the same time, switching up the formula a decent amount. Especially good because there are significantly more ghosts this time around, and the map feels a lot bigger due to that zoomed in isometric perspective. I definitely recommend tracking this game down in particular and giving it a shot. If you're a fan of Pac-Man, you'll most likely get a kick out of this. Unfortunately, this is about where the arcade ends for most people on a casual playthrough. There are 189 tokens in the game, and the last arcade game, Miss Pac-Man, requires 180 to be unlocked. Now, I hear your arguments. Well, yeah, that is a lot of tokens, but surely it's not that difficult. Tedious, but it can get done. Well, kind of, but not really. In order to reach this goal, you need to collect every single token in the game, complete every time trial, and the most egregious bit, 100% completing all but 9 of the levels in the game. This, as we have established, is not an easy task, but let me add one more point of contention to this wacky world. In most of the levels, you'll reach an object known as a Galaxian, which is a reference to the arcade game, you know it well, Pee-Pee and Beavis, whoopee. Some are easier to find than others, but you need to find it for 100% completion. You also probably want to, because it does give you a checkpoint when you collect it. And in some levels, like to pull a random example, Ghost Bayou, there are very large stretches between checkpoints where the Galaxian safety zone can be a godsend. Beat the mazes, and you can play them again in the arcade. Would you want to? That's up to you, but at least they're more varietous than the original's 4 stages, so pick your poison on that front, I guess.
And that was Pac-Man World 2. All in all, it's an okay game, very middle of the road. Starts off pretty strong, loses some steam a bit in the middle there, and the ending made me want to tear my hair out. That being said, there's a decent amount of fun to be had. Sure, it's not anything super stellar, but if you're a 2000s kid and you want to play a new 3D platformer that you haven't before, give this one a shot. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go see a dentist to get key shards ripped out of my teeth. Goodbye, everybody!